Hello everyone and welcome to today's session. Today we are going to discuss an important question in international relations. Is international law is losing its importance in today's world? To understand this debate properly, let's begin by looking at the current global situation. We know that in the recent years the international politics has become increasingly tense and unpredictable. For instance, the rising tension between the United States and Iran have once again raised the concern about the possible use of military force. Whenever such tensions emerge, a natural question arises. Do the international rules still influence how the countries behave, or are the states simply act according to their power and the strategic interest? Because of this development, the many scholars and analysts have begun to argue that international law is weakening. According to them, the world may be moving towards a new system where powerful countries act according to their own interests without paying much attention to the global norms. This perception becomes stronger after the several international developments that we see in the recent times. For example, that we can say that one of the example that is Russian invasion of Ukraine, Israel military actions in Gaza and West Asia, and the unilateral decision taken by the powerful state has raised doubt about the effectiveness of global legal norms. Similarly, the policies during the presidencies of Donald Trump that including the withdrawal of United States from the multiple international organizations that further intensify this debate whether the rule-based global order is weakening. However, before we accept the idea that the international law is collapsing, it is important to analyze the issue more carefully. While it is true that the international law is currently facing a serious pressure, declaring its death would be an oversimplification. To understand why, we need to look at one of the most fundamental principles of international law. One of the core rules that is governing the international rule is the prohibition of use of force. This rule is clearly mentioned in Article 2 under Clause 4 of the Charter of the United Nations. According to this principle, the countries should not threaten or use military force against a territorial integrity or political independence of another state. Now, at this point, one might ask an obvious question. If this rule still exists, why do we still see wars and military conflict? Indeed, the rule had been violated several times in the recent times. However, it is important to recognize that such violations are not new in international politics. Even during the earlier decade, the world witnessed many conflicts. In fact, in 1970, the international law scholar, the Thomas Frank Harry, argued that this rule has already lost its relevance or the meaning because numerous wars were taking place during the Cold War period. For example, the world were experienced conflicts such as Soviet-Afghan War, Gulf War, and later the military intervention that we seen in Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Libya. All these conflicts clearly weaken the principle that prohibit the use of force. Yet, despite these repeated violations, the rule itself does not disappear. It continues to exist as the main legal framework through which international community evaluate the actions of the states. This leads us an important understanding, which means international law may be violated, but it still remains the reference point for judging the state behavior. This is precisely why the international law continues to matter. According to an expert that called Monica Hakim, he said, when international relations operate within the legal framework, the governments are compelled to justify their action using the legal arguments. In other words, what we can say that even powerful state rarely says that they accepted purely because they wanted to do. Instead, they attempt to show that their actions are consistent with the international law. For example, the many military actions are explained using the principle of self-defense, which international law recognizes as an exception to the prohibition of the use of force. Whether these explanations are genuine or merely a political justification can always be debated. However, the important point is that countries still feels the need to explain their action using the language of international law. Another important role of international law is that to provide smaller and weaker countries with the framework to question the actions of more powerful states. Without such normative framework, the global politics become a far more dangerous because more power alone would determine the outcomes. However, while international law continues to exist, the way countries interact with has changed in the recent times. In the earlier decade, the powerful state usually attempt to justify their action to the legal arguments. This means that even during the conflict, international law remained the part of the conversation. Today, however, the global politics environment is different with the rise of populist, the authoritarian politics in the several countries. Some leaders appear less interested in providing detailed legal justification for their actions. Instead, the geopolitical and economic interests are sometimes expressed more clearly. For instance, we all know that the discussion that was related to the control over resources such as Venezuela oil that clearly demonstrate how strategic interests can shape the international behavior. Yet, the focusing only on military conflict create another misunderstanding. International law is not limited only to the operation of war and peace. In reality, the system of international law that govern a wide range of global activities. Today, it regulates international trade, foreign investment, aviation, maritime resource and outer space activity that include the human right, climate change and control of chemical and biological weapons. As noted by a political expert, this demonstrates that international law continues to expand and influence the many areas of global cooperation. Another reason why international law is often underestimated is that much of its work happened silently away from the public attention. The international negotiation continue to shape the economic relation across the world. For instance, what we can say that discussion of free trade agreement between India and European Union that show how the international legal framework facilitate the economic cooperation. Similarly, the new global agreement are being developed to address the emerging challenges. For example, we can say High Seas Treaty. We know that High Seas Treaty that aims to protect the maritime biodiversity beyond the national jurisdiction. While the global pandemic agreement that are being framed by the WHO being designed to strengthen the cooperation during the further health emergencies. So in addition to these treaties, international court and tribunal also have expanded over time. We know that there are many institutions such as International Criminal Court, the African Court on Human Rights and People Rights which demonstrate how the international dispute can increasingly be resolved through the legal mechanism rather than through conflict. These institutions may not always attract the headline, but they continue to resolve the complex international dispute peacefully. All these developments lead us to an important conclusion. The international lawyer Philip Sands reminds us that a large part of international law works silently behind the scenes. It allows the goods and people to move across the borders that enable the global communication network to function and support the cooperation between the countries in many areas. Therefore, even though the international law is facing the serious challenges today, it would be incorrect to say that it has collapsed. Instead, the real challenge before the global community is to protect and strengthen the existing system of international rules. Because without such rules, the international relation would become far more unstable and unpredictable. Thank you all, and I will see you in the next session.